USB ports are used by many devices, keyboards, mice, printers, cameras, and much more. The USB port enables the ability to power the device and also transfer data between the device and the computer. And so here's the different USB versions. Now, we're not too worried about the first two on the list. Low speed and full speed are outdated. They're deprecated. It's recommended that you don't use them because they're slow. If with today's USB devices, you really have to use USB 2 or USB 3. Now, USB 2.0 is known as high speed, and that can send 480 megabits per second. And if you see a black USB port on a computer on the front or back, chances are it's USB 2. Now, if you see a blue port, that's going to be USB 3.0, super speed. That's the SS, 5 gigabits per second. And if you're going to be doing anything with a lot of data transfer or audio and video, USB 3.0 is going to be the way you want to go. Building on USB 3.0, we have 3.1 and 3.2. 3.1 is Super Speed Plus, which has a data transfer rate of 10 gigabits per second. And USB 3.2, also Super Speed Plus, which can do 10 or 20 gigabits per second. But that requires the use of a USB-C connector and cable. So there's some of the versions, but for the exam, you should really know USB 2.0 and USB 3.0, their names and their data transfer rates. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our computer and look at the USB ports that are on there now. Okay, so here's our AV editor computer, and here are our USB ports. We've got 10 USB ports in total, and you can see we have two different colors. Here are 4 black USB ports, and that means that those are USB 2.0, and they can do 480 megabits per second. Now again, if you want to do high-speed transfer, you want the blue ports, and we have 6 of those. So these are super speed, as you can see by the little SS and USB logo here. So that's USB 3.0, and that does 5 gigabits per second. So, if you're going to do audio or video transfers or very large files, this is the way to go. Use the blue ports. And you usually have USB ports on the front of a computer as well. And so you get some extra ones that are connected by way of a flex cable to the motherboard. Now you'll notice here this particular USB port is outlined in green, and that's for the USB BIOS flashback. And what that means is you can back up the entire set of BIOS information, the whole firmware, to your USB flash drive on this port. And the beauty of it is, let's say you're updating your BIOS and it fails during the update, or the new configuration doesn't work, or it doesn't see your CPU or RAM properly or something. You could take your USB flash drive, plug it in here while the computer's on, and then press this button to do a BIOS flashback. And it'll pull that old BIOS back from your USB flash drive and restore that so that your system will work. So that's a real nice feature on this particular motherboard. Now, keep in mind, all of these USB ports are integrated to the motherboard. If you need more, you could attach a USB hub into these. Now, if you want more USB 3.0 ports, you'd have to plug that hub into one of these ports. You could also get a card, an adapter card, and install that with additional USB ports. That's up to you. But generally, you have computers that have 8, maybe 6, 8 or 10 ports of USB. A laptop will have less, and that's when USB hubs become more prevalent. But generally, 10 ports and 6 of the 3.0 ports is enough for most people's needs. So there's the USB ports. So the ports that we were showing are Type A ports. And here's an image of the different types available. The Type A port is the most common, and that's a 4-pin port. You'll see those on the computers. Then the Type B port, also a 4-pin port, is the type of port that you would see on a printer or other secondary device that connects to the computer. Then you also have the 5-pin ports. the mini and the micro connectors. And for example, the micro B USB port is very common on smartphones and tablets, especially ones that run Android. And that's just usually known as micro USB. And the fifth pin on those allows for programmability for the devices that it connects to. And so you have a lot of options there, and you can do on the go and things of that nature. The latest port as of the recording of this video is USB-C, which we mentioned before is required if you want to run USB 3.2 Super Speed Plus. And this port is a little bit different. This is a 24-pin port. And one of the nice things about this is you can plug in the connector face up or face down. Doesn't matter. With the rest of the previous USB ports, it had to be oriented in one way. For example, with Type A or Micro B. So 24-pin port. Devices started using it around 2016, 2017, and it's very common on smartphones and some other mobile devices nowadays. Now, a computer can have 127 devices maximum within USB, but again, most computers only have 4, 8, or 10 USB ports. To add devices beyond this, you can use the USB hub, and you can use a series of 5 hubs in total. And remember that all cables connecting to the USB devices must comply with the speed and also with the maximum length. For example, USB version 1.1 cables were limited to 3 meters. Version 2 can go to 5 meters. And the maximum recommended for version 3 is 3 meters. Generally, the 4 pins that you have on these, you have a plus 5 volt pin for power. Then you have positive and negative voltages for data pins and a grounding pin. And again, if you have that 5th pin, that's going to be for programmability. Now, by default, a USB device is designed to be a host all the time or a slave all the time. The host is in charge of initiating data transfers. So, for example, if you plug in a USB flash drive to your computer, the computer is the host and the USB flash drive is the slave. However, starting with USB version 2.0, we have on the go or OTG. This enables a USB device to act as both a host and a slave. And this is necessary if you're going to have a smartphone or a tablet computer. This way, those can initiate data transfers as well as the computer. And so usually these devices connect by mini or especially micro plugs. And the USB devices connect to what is known as a root hub within the motherboard, regardless of what version you're dealing with. And these USB devices or root hubs and host controllers can be viewed within Windows. We could go to the device manager and we could bring up the run prompt. And I like to type in the executable of device manager, which is devmgmt.msc. Press enter. And that'll bring up the device manager. And we see our USB controllers, for example, USB root hub or the enhanced host controller for USB 3.0. And then you will also see the human interface devices. And, these are going to be your keyboards, your mice. Here's the standard Microsoft optical mouse, keyboards, video devices, anything that really connects to USB that you might interoperate with. And another way is to use the system information tool. You can type the MSInfo32 within the run prompt to bring that up, and you can see some information about USB there as well. Let's talk a little bit about Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt version 1 runs at 10 gigabits per second. Version 2 runs at 20 gigabits per second. And those use a mini display port. And here's an example of that. This is a mini display port. Now, you'll see these in 2 different varieties. The first one will be with a little icon of a monitor. If that's the case, then you can only connect monitors to it. It can only display video. But you also see the bolt here. If you see the bolt like this, then that means it's a Thunderbolt port, and you can attach other peripherals and send data through that. Then we have version 3, which can transfer at 40 gigabits per second, and that actually uses the USB Type-C port, which is a little bit different than our Type A that we showed before. They're not really, they can be compatible, but it's not the same port. So you can't plug a Type A device into a Type C port. And to get that higher speed, that 40 gigabits per second with version 3, that's the port you would need to use. So you see some of the differences here. You see this is your Thunderbolt port. It's a little smaller than a standard USB port. That gives you some frame of reference for that. And so those are really the ones that you want to know. Thunderbolt's very common on MacBooks and other Mac computers, but it is an Intel technology, so you can possibly see it anywhere. And as far as Macs go, that's taken over on top of FireWire, or the Mac user might use USB or their RJ45 connection to do data transfers. Last on the list, let's discuss serial cables briefly, and I'll show one now. Now, there are lots of different types of serial connections, but for this video, what I want to talk about is RS-232. That's the recommended standards 232 serial connection. And what I have here is an example of an adapter that uses RS-232. One of the reasons we might use RS-232 is to communicate from, say, a computer to a dial-up modem. But it's used for a lot of other things as well. Engineering devices, terminal equipment, terminal devices, either handheld or wall mount, analytical devices, and so on. But let's say you wanted to connect your computer to a dial-up modem, an external one, you would use RS-232, and you'd connect from the computer's COM port or communications port. That's a serial port. Some motherboards have it, some don't. And laptops aren't going to have that, so you'd need some type of adapter like what I'm showing here. But what you have normally is one of two different COM ports, one of two different serial ports. You either have this, the 9-pin version, and that's usually what COM 1 would be, communications port 1, and this is a 9-pin. It's called the DE9. It's got 5 pins and 4 pins and screw-on terminals here. It's also referred to as a DB9, and a lot of manufacturers call it that, but the proper name is DE9. Either way, there's another connector, and that's a 25-pin, a little wider, and quite often you'll see that with other devices. But generally, if you need to make a connection to, say, a dial-up modem, it could be 9-pin on the computer and 9-pin on the modem, or 9-pin on the computer and 25-pin on the modem. But if you want to make connectivity from, say, a device that doesn't have that COM port, that serial port, or it's a laptop, then you need something like this, which is an adapter. You've got your USB Type A to connect into the computer, and then your serial connection. So something like this could work well. It's slow, but it's still used by a lot of devices. You're definitely going to see it in the field for a long time to come, because it's so simple to use. Very basic serial technology, and it works well. And it works great for communicating with terminal equipment. So that's the type of serial cable, RS-232. And this is the DE9, otherwise known as a DB9. So lots of stuff that we talked about in this video, but definitely the most important is going to be USB. And the latest of which, as of the recording of this video, is USB-C. Here we have the USB-C connector. And on the other end, a Type A to connect to the computer or laptop or to a fast charger. Definitely need an adaptive charger, fast charger, in order to charge your devices nowadays, because the batteries are so powerful, they take so long to charge, right? But USB-C came out around 2016, and a lot of devices started using it in 2017. A lot of mobile devices on the Android side, and so you'll see a lot more of this. Okay, so definitely know all these connectors, but especially USB. And that's about it for this video.